Hi everyone. So what's up? What I'm going to be talking about today is a journey that Canterbury Bankstown is currently on to eliminate single-use plastics from our organisation. I'm going to quickly go through a little bit about Canterbury Bankstown, where this program came from, where we are on the journey at the moment, and I'm going to labour the journey point because we are not at a destination and we're not going to be at a destination for quite some time on this. Going to talk a little bit about the route that we're taking to get there, some of the turbulence that we faced almost immediately upon announcing that we were going to try and get rid of single-use plastics, but also some of the good stuff that's happened as well, and kind of map out where we're going to head. So first of all, a little bit about Canterbury Bankstown. We are the largest council in New South Wales by population, so 360-odd thousand people. We have about 1,500 staff. We have 430 buildings, so if we're trying to eliminate single-use plastics from our organisation, that's a lot of actual locations that we have to focus on. That includes things like 9 libraries, 6 swimming pools, I think it's 8 childcare centres, so many different infrastructure that we have to deal with, and then different people in that infrastructure. I think it's 4 depots we have, so there's a lot of different places that we have to try to address this issue with. What I want to do first, though, is actually put this into a larger context. So this is an international movement, getting rid of single-use plastics. If I'm not mistaken, and I may be, but if I'm not mistaken, the city of Delhi was the first jurisdiction in the world to say they were going to get rid of single-use plastics. So they announced an outright ban. The whole of India has now announced a ban by 2022 that they want to get rid of single-use plastics. The EU has recently announced they are focusing on the 10 top single-use plastics that account for 70% of the ocean plastic. And just this week, 187 countries agreed to add single-use plastics or the export of plastics to the Basel Convention. So what we're actually going to see now is almost every country in the world, except the United States, saying they're going to control the export of single-use plastics off their border and therefore take ownership of that. So this is an international issue that is happening all over the world. There's action all over the place. On a national level, it's also happening. So you'll see in a second, we announced our movement to phase out single-use plastics in June last year. Our media team said we were the first council in the country to do that. I don't believe that was actually true. At the time, I think Brisbane, the city of Sydney, Inner West were all working on something similar. In the same week that we made our announcement, Darwin announced theirs and a bunch of others. And all those councils that I just mentioned were talking about it for their own practices, their own buildings. Interestingly, earlier this year, the ACT has announced a ban that will be for all of the businesses within their jurisdiction as well as their own activities. Hobart has announced similar. Neither of those two are actually in force yet. There's a long way to go before they'd be able to do that, but it's showing that there is a movement in that direction, and South Australia as a state is starting to talk about it. So on an international level, a lot is happening. On a national level, a lot is happening. And then it's also happening in business as well. So we've seen over the last couple of years that businesses have started to make a change. So we have Coles and Woolworths announcing they're taking a voluntary ban on plastic bags. It did become something of a debacle in terms of the Coles case, and then they had their little plastic collectibles that ended up on the beaches anyway. And we've got McDonald's also internationally saying they're getting rid of straws, which is great, but is that their biggest crime, getting rid of straws, or are there other things they should focus on? But the point being is they're going in this direction. They're showing that something is happening. And that middle photo is actually a photo of the Qantas flight that people may have heard about last week, which was the first flight internationally that had no single-use plastics on board at all. It was run, the crew, the cabin crew that staffed that flight were all from their green team. They had either reusable, compostable or recyclable for everything, and they flew from here to, I think, London. So again, a small change. It's one plane out of very many planes, but it's showing that we're actually going in a direction. Which brings us to our journey at Canterbury Bankstown. In the lead up to Plastic Free July last year, one of our councillors, a Liberal councillor interestingly enough, put forward a notice of motion saying they wanted to phase out single-use plastics in our operation, and that's very important that we talked about a phase out. Randwick, I think, was the other council that said they were banning single-use plastics in the same week that we made our announcement. They were banning it pretty much from the following week. If I remember correctly. I don't know how well that's gone, but we were never that ambitious. We were looking at phasing it over a period of time. And so we began on our journey, and our journey's taken a while, but what we're trying to do is make sure that we're bringing all of those 1,500 staff along with us on that journey. So what we actually did is sent out a survey to every manager of every unit in the organisation and asked them, do you use these types of plastic? How much do you use? And what circumstances do you use it? And as you can see, this is just 3 screen grabs of the responses we got. Top left, no, never. We never use them. When we got those responses, we didn't really believe them, I have to say. The lower one, we got one of the childcare centres, so we had all our childcare centres responded individually, and they gave us more explanation. And then the one on the right was, I think from the finance department, they knew exactly how many straws they had, which is fantastic. So what you can actually see there is if we want to take the journey to get rid of these plastics, we need to take into account that we're dealing with people who say they don't use any at all, to people who know exactly how many they use, to some who are saying, in this case we might, in this case we won't, sometimes we have to keep using them. So for our journey, what we're trying to do is actually understand where everyone is on that. We identified the target things that we wanted to get rid of, the individual materials that we wanted to get rid of, and there's probably absolutely no surprise in this for anybody. These are pretty much what the EU said they're going to get rid of, pretty much what India and Delhi said they're going to get rid of, and they're the ones that we're targeting. So plates, cups, plastic plates and cups, straws, cutlery, balloons, coffee cups and water bottles. So these are the items that we're actually really focusing on. And we'll look at others, and we've kind of found a couple of others, one of which was merchandise. We didn't actually have that as one of our things, but our merchandise, our comms department, in terms of merchandising, has actually really got on board in a way that we hadn't expected. So we can really add merchandise to that. But I'll show you some ways that's really successful and some ways it's really understanding the units you're dealing with. But what we also decided is that we're going to really take a staged approach to this, because to bring such a big organisation on board, we can't just do it all at once. So the way we're working it is our own operations and our own buildings are our number one priority to start with. Then the events that we run and own, so like Bankstown Bites, that's our next priority. Then the facilities that we own but are leased by other organisations. So we've got, so that bottom photo here is a reception centre we have in Campsie. Which is managed by an independent business. We own it, the independent business, so they're our kind of our third priority. And then the notice of motion mentioned that we're also going to work with local businesses across the LGA, so kind of referring to what Hobart and the ACT are doing, but we're not making that our priority at the moment. It's a kind of a fourth priority. And so what we're actually doing is identifying each of these areas and developing ways that we can influence each of those. And then what we actually did, because we needed to, again, start taking people on the journey, we actually wanted a system by which they could actually understand why we were doing what we were doing and how they could fit into it. So we actually developed this principle. So it's a principle-based approach that we have. You'll recognise it as something quite similar to the waste hierarchy, which is really what it is. But basically what that means is if we have a childcare centre ring us and say, we've got this issue, we want to kind of get rid of it, we can talk them through this process and say, can you actually avoid using that thing altogether? So straws is the primary one. You can get rid of straws, just stop using them. If you can't get rid of them, can you replace it with something that is reusable? Coffee cups. So get rid of your coffee cups, use a keep cup. If you need to keep using them, can you find an alternative single use that is better? So in terms of straws for people with disabilities, you might swap from plastic to paper in that case. If you can't get rid of them altogether, can you reduce them? Can you look at a way that you can limit the number of those altogether. And so again, you can look at straws for that. So don't have them out on the counter, have them under the counter for elderly people, the disabled, if they need them. So, and then for some products, we recognise you're going to have to keep using them. So gloves for food handling, nappies at childcare centres. So we can't really do much about those. So you keep doing those. But really it's putting that, every decision we make based onto that system. Like I said, we did the surveys with all the managers. We then followed them up with actual face-to-face interviews with all the managers to talk more deeply. So we took their survey responses and we said, okay, you've said you use this, can we talk about that? What we found pretty much straight off is that there was resistance from some elements of the organisation, and that's probably not surprising, but that's again why we're going through this whole process. And I have that slushy photo there because slushies were one of the areas that we found resistance almost immediately. We have 8 swimming pools, they sell slushies, they make several $100,000 a year out of selling slushies. So what we're saying is, for the sake of the environment, stop selling this. On the other hand, what they hear is, we can't employ as many people, or we can't, be financially viable if we don't have that. We worked reasonably hard with them. We didn't get very far with them in that respect. And then there was a change of manager, and all of a sudden we found a compostable straw that can go into slushy groups, and we're now using those. So sometimes we were quite successful in getting somebody to come along, sometimes we weren't. In this case, we weren't, but then they changed, so we got where we needed to go. One of the other big issues that we found, which is again probably not surprising to anybody, is the physical infrastructure of the organisation became a barrier to success for us. So we've just merged, we put a whole bunch of people into one building who used to be in 2 buildings. It's a lot more crowded. We've got brand new kitchens put in. We don't have dishwashers in almost any of those kitchens. So we have community consultation, for example, on the ground floor and on the 3rd floor. We've got big meeting rooms. We're asking people to use reusable cups and plates rather than disposable. What that actually means is they may need to spend 15 or 20 minutes extra setting up and packing up a meeting because we don't have the physical infrastructure for them to wash the stuff. It's a design flaw with some of the design of the kitchens, but it's something that we need to address before we can actually expect them to change the way that they do it. I'll talk in a little bit about some of the wins in that in a minute. One of the other really interesting things that we came up against, so about a month after we made the announcement, we have a thing called the General Manager's Talks. Other organisations might have it, but the General Manager literally goes around to the 2 main office blocks, to all of the depots, to all of the libraries and to childcare, and talks to all the staff about the aims and objectives for the year. It's a really big thing. So immediately before, the year before we made this announcement, they used to take water bottles for every single staff person, so that's 1,500 water bottles they would be buying and giving out to people. Food was served on plastic plates. The governance team realised that they couldn't do that now, and to be honest, some of them never wanted to do it at all. And so they contacted us and said, okay, we want alternatives to the plastic bottles. What do we do? We said, okay, great. We can buy you actually jugs. So we fill up the jugs with water, like 10-litre jugs, and you fill it up. And they said, great. Then what we actually did is we realised we actually don't need it for the blue building because we've got catering services there and they can provide that. But then when we went to the depot, what we realised is that one of the depots, there's only one filter in the whole building. It's 2 stories up from the meeting room. They can't fill up a 10-litre jug, or in fact it would be 10 10-litre jugs, and carry it downstairs. So what we realised is that there's no single way to deal with this. We need different ways to deal with it in different locations. What we've actually done in that location and I'll come back to that. So basically there's no one answer. For a single event, same event happens in multiple places, we need different responses in each of those. We took a couple of side trips on the way as well. So some of you may know about the Really Good Compost giveaway that we have at Council. So we collect people's green bins, take it off, compost it and give it back as compost, free to residents. It's one of our most popular programs. It sometimes gets shut down by the police because the cars are queued up out onto the road helicopters and all sorts of stuff. We realised that we were giving away lots of plastic bags as part of that process. So we looked for alternatives to that plastic bag. So we got samples of compostable plastic bags, which I can tell you don't work very well with compost. Some of these, it's delivered on pallets. Some of those pallets, if they don't get collected one event, they may wait 2 months for another event. The bags don't last. So compostable plastic bags didn't work. We looked at bulk services so we could shovel it into people's cars, but that doesn't work for the vast majority of residents. So in this case, we did a lot of work and we've ended up back with a reusable plastic bag. We looked at asking people to bring their bags back so that we can get them recycled through a cleaning, like a recycler that can deal with contaminated bags. But again, they said we would need something like a container full to be financially viable. So in this case, there's really not much that we can do about it. And again, this is one of the issues with single-use plastic, that sometimes you can't do stuff about it. So in terms of the successes that we've had, the day of the announcement, our cafes got rid of plastic straws from the counters instantly. There was no fuss, nobody complained, there was no issues. They have a couple of paper straws for people who want them. That was such an easy win. They were happy to tell everybody about it. They put little signs up, everything else. So that was actually a fantastic outcome, and they did that without us even telling. They saw the notice of motion and off they went. The general manager's talks, like I said, we got rid of all the plastic bottles, almost all the plastic bottles from those. The council meetings got rid of all the plastic bottles from those, which was great because the councillor who did not do the notice of motion noted that he did have a plastic bottle in front of him while he was doing that. So they're all gone. And we don't give out single-use plastic bottles at any of those events anymore. We got the merchandising team on board. Again, they were actually really quite active. They produced branded coffee cups and water bottles, which they now distribute. So at our citizenship ceremonies, that kind of stuff, we don't give out the plastic ones, we give out those, which in many ways is great. There are issues with that. They all come in a single-use plastic bag. So that is a problem. We're trying to work with the manufacturer to get rid of those. But in the meanwhile, the governance unit is actually taking the bags off and taking them off to Coles to recycle them, which they weren't doing before. So there are some benefits, some good outcomes to that. Really interestingly, you can see on our merchandising order form, the only red on the page is that you can't get water bottles anymore, and that was, again, came out of the comms unit almost immediately. And the other graphic there is what we realised with the infrastructure: no dishwashers, no water filters at the depots, that kind of stuff. We put a budget bid in, got a budget of about $60,000 that's come to the resource recovery team to figure out where the most need is for these, and we can work with those units to put in dishwashers where there are public events or water dispensers. We're looking at rentable, they won't be paying for it, but anyway, catering trays for each floor of the building they'll come out of this budget as well. So rather than distributing the money off to a whole group of people who may or may not share the view that we have with this, that we'll be controlling that money and buying the kind of resources that we need. So where to next? So ongoing engagement. We are continuing to work with all of the different departments across the organisation to figure out how we can implement this. We're testing, trialling and measuring, and what we've actually not done up to this date is measure the success of this, and in part because some of the things just happened straight off. We had no time to count how many bottles there were, how many there weren't, and we don't have the data. 430 buildings, we've had nothing in place to count single-use plastics in those, so we haven't been able yet to monitor those, but that's a big part of the plan going forward, is to monitor the success of these. And we've built single-use plastics into our corporate sustainability plan, so it is now one of the primary pillars of that, and we'll be implementing the strategies that we develop from now on into the future. So it's a big journey, it's a very long journey. We don't yet know when it's going to end up, but it is one that has been embraced really significantly and positively by most of the organisation after it was announced. Thank you.